The fool is one of the most intriguing figures in the history of the world. He has been with us since time immemorial, causing surprise and laughter and confusion. We worship folly by seeing it in others and by willingly displaying it in ourselves. It is one of the timeless archetypes which we all inherit at birth. But today many of us suffer from a painful absence of the fool in our lives. We have become frenetic and upright, taking ourselves far too seriously. We try so hard to conform to a world that promotes efficiency and productivity above all else. We have become cogs in a machine, forgetting that we are alive. As William Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage, and all the men and women merely players. But we have forgotten that playfulness is a basic human need. We wonder why we become bored and exhausted so easily. We have lost the capacity for spontaneity and authenticity and passion. The antidote to this exhaustion is to give the fool archetype some space in our lives. We need to develop the archetype of the sage who recognizes the limits of his knowledge. We need to learn to laugh at ourselves every now and then. The character of the fool is complex. He is often described as dull-witted or inarticulate, unable to conform to conventional standards. But he also possesses a natural simplicity and an innocence of heart that the clever man lacks. The word fool comes from the Latin folis, meaning a pair of bellows expelling empty air. When extended to people, it implies an empty-headed person with insubstantial thoughts. But there is a hidden meaning here. Bellows furnish the oxygen needed for combustion. In the same way, the fool fires us up and keeps the flame of life burning. In 1511, the Dutch scholar Erasmus published In Praise of Folly. It became a profoundly penetrating examination of the human condition. In this work, Folly introduces herself and begins by praising herself because nobody else will. She argues that life would be dull without her. She suggests that friendship and marriage are only possible because of a certain amount of folly. We overlook the defects of our loved ones and consider them small vices. If we were purely rational, we would see every flaw and relationships would crumble. Erasmus compares philosophers to theater critics who unmask the characters and ruin the performance. They are boring and annoying because they do not understand the utility of illusion. The fool seems to be infinitely freer and happier than those burdened by wisdom. Fools always speak the truth because they lack the wisdom to craft lies. To be a person is nothing other than to play the fool. Acknowledging this fact is the highest form of wisdom. This represents a nostalgic return to a simpler way of life. It is a wisdom that comes not from the mind, but from the heart. Sometimes the simple-minded in their purity can penetrate to deeper truths than the learned. Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote that the wisest of all is he who can call himself a fool at least once a month. This is a faculty almost unheard of nowadays. We see this paradox in the figure of the wise fool. Socrates is the archetypal example. His educational method was based on exposing the folly of the supposedly wise. He claimed that his own wisdom was derived solely from an awareness of his ignorance. Knowledge of ignorance is itself a kind of knowledge. There are two ways to be a fool. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. When there is an uncomfortable truth that needs to be spoken, the powerful are often afraid to speak it. It is usually the fool who steps in. There is something heroic about this. The fool speaks the truth nobody else dares to utter, and this brings instant relief. We can distinguish between the natural fool who lacks social awareness and the professional fool. The professional fool uses humor and wit to make harsh truths palatable. One follows his heart, the other follows his mind. The greatest fools are often cleverer than the people who laugh at them. The great secret of the successful fool is that he is no fool at all. William Blake wrote that if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. The fool shares traits with the clown and the trickster. They are sources of humor and catalysts for comic catharsis. But they also express a duality of order and disorder. What seems like a joke can in fact be a warning. Soren Kierkegaard told a parable about a fire breaking out backstage in a theater. The clown came out to warn the public. They thought it was a joke and applauded. He repeated the warning, and the acclaim was even greater. Kierkegaard thought that is how the world will end, to general applause from wits who believe it is a joke. Professional fools can bring awareness to tragedy, but many of them come from a place of tragedy themselves. This is the sad clown paradox. Comedy acts as a defense mechanism to remove suppressed feelings of rage and aggression. The clown has to sacrifice his well-being by always putting on the same face. This one-sidedness takes its toll mentally. The clown slowly becomes enveloped by his shadow, the dark side of his personality. We see this in the evil clown archetype or the Joker. In medieval theater, clowns would snatch spectators into a helmet to balance the light and dark. There is also a difference between the fool and the trickster. The fool is innocent and naive, while the trickster is intentionally deceptive. The trickster loves schadenfreude, obtaining pleasure from the misfortunes of others. The trickster plays the fool to trap people. But the fool is not interested in laughing at a person, but laughing with them. Laughing at oneself helps to break the ice and remove the social mask. This courageous feat throws one into a vulnerable state, which allows for genuine connection. In medieval times, the court jester's job was to entertain the aristocracy. It was believed that keeping a fool on the premises warded off the evil eye. This is not just superstition, it is a psychological truth. We must keep the fool out front where we can keep an eye on him. We must admit him to our inner court to bring fresh ideas and new energy. Without the fool's observations, our inner landscape becomes a sterile wasteland. During the Middle Ages, the Feast of Fools allowed the natural order to be turned upside down. Underdogs were allowed to vent their repressed hostility and rebellion. The fool also had a unique role in the royal court. He was both an insider and an outsider. He was the only person allowed to ridicule the king, using a bauble or a puppet. The jester could say things he might not want to say himself. Jesters were often free from punishment because of this close relation to power. But some went too far and paid with their lives. Fools represent values which are rejected by the group. They are often ostracized for their rebelliousness. But every group needs such a figure to disrupt the very things the culture is based on. Often these jesters had physical deformities or came from poor families. Excluded from the activities of the average person, they were forced to discover resources within themselves. Through loneliness and suffering, they found depth. In Shakespeare's King Lear, the king is dependent on the fool. When the king is lonely, he acts as his alter ego. The fool reverses the relationship between the dominant and the subservient. We see this dynamic in the myth of Parsifal. Parsifal is known as the young fool or the pure fool. He leaves his mother to become a knight and goes through many trials. He arrives at the Grail Castle where the Fisher King is wounded. The king's wound is so severe he cannot live, yet he cannot die. His kingdom is barren. This expresses how a psychological wound manifests in the external world. Every adolescent receives this Fisher King wound. It is the painful realization that the world is not just joy and happiness. Parsifal attends the ceremony but fails to ask the question that would heal the king. He remains silent because he was told not to ask too many questions. He relies on convention instead of his heart. He leaves the castle and it disappears. It takes him 20 long and painful years to find it again. The inner castle is always there, but it is invisible until we see the world with new eyes. When Parsifal finally returns, he asks the Fisher King, whom does the Grail serve? Immediately the king is healed. The inner fool is the only one who can touch the Fisher King wound. The intellect cannot heal deep psychological wounds, only the innocent part of us can. A man must consent to look to the foolish, innocent part of himself for his cure. We see another side of this in Don Quixote. He reads so many books on chivalry that he goes mad and decides to become a knight. He attacks windmills believing they are giants. He recruits a peasant named Sancho Panza who represents realism. Don Quixote sees the world not as it is but as he wishes it to be. He does harm despite his good intentions. This warns us that even intelligent people can fall victim to their own foolishness. At the end of his life, Don Quixote wakes from his madness. He realizes he has wasted his life and dies from an overdose of reality. This begs the question, is it better to know the truth and be unhappy or live in a fool's paradise? Dostoevsky explores this in his novel The Idiot. Prince Mishkin is a positively beautiful individual in a corrupt world. He is called an idiot because he is frank and unable to hide his feelings. He stands in sharp contrast to the cold and manipulative society around him. He does not understand why someone would choose to be unhappy. He believes that beauty will save the world. In folklore, it is often the youngest brother, the simpleton, who becomes the hero. Even the fool is a beloved figure in Russian tales. He is taken advantage of because of his kindness. His brothers are tempted by money and power, but Ivan lives a simple life. When devils try to ruin him, they fail because Ivan does not play by their rules. When he is threatened, he innocently blesses his enemies and they vanish. while his brothers focus on their minds, even relies on his heart. The man who has nothing receives everything. The fool becomes the hero. In the tarot, the fool is the card numbered 0. He holds a white rose symbolizing innocence and walks toward a cliff. He is willing to sacrifice everything for the trip. He is the beginning and the end of the journey. The number 0 represents the circle, the fullness of being. It is the nothing that contains everything. The fool is the precursor to transformation. Nothing starts without the fool. Inventors and geniuses are often looked at as fools at the beginning of their careers. This connects to the Zen Buddhist concept of shoshin, or beginner's mind. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. If you think you know everything, you cannot learn. The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom. To embark on a journey of self-discovery is traditionally considered foolish. We are supposed to follow a linear path of work and security. When a person deviates from this path, they seem like a fool. But the first step into the unknown is the most important. The fool thinks of the adventure and is less worried about making mistakes. The person who thinks too much remains stagnant. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. It is the fear of uncertainty that paralyzes us. But failure can open doors we never imagined. As the alchemists say, in filth it will be found. What you need most is found where you least wish to look. The fool usually has no idea what he is getting into. If he knew the trials ahead, he might never start. He lives in the moment and sees reality as it is. He is not afraid of change. No great person has ever not committed a mistake. It is the journey that matters. However, the fool has a shadow side. He can be so stubborn that he refuses to look where he is going. He can fall off the cliff. Sometimes our inner voice warns us not to be a fool. It tells us everyone will laugh. This is the voice of conformity. The dark side of the fool is the fear that causes you to play it safe. We strive for acceptance to the detriment of our true desires. This leads to jealousy and resentment. The fool is also tied to the archetype of eternal youth. It brings the creativity of childhood into adult life. But if we are not careful, it can doom us to unrealistic fantasies. We can end up experiencing life as a prison because it does not match our dreams. The fool is closely related to the child. Children have less of a persona and follow their instincts. The child has half entered the rational world and the madman has half escaped it. Both are released from the remorseless pressure of daily events. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that man's maturity is to have regained the seriousness that he had as a child at play. In Jungian psychology, the fool is equated with the inferior function. This is the most undeveloped aspect of our psyche. If you are a thinker, your inferior function is feeling. The fool represents this despised part of the personality. But he is also the bridge to the unconscious. He holds the secret key to the totality of the individual. The fool connects the everyday world with the world of imagination. He is the gate to the great treasure. It is the inferior function that leads to the healing of our wounds. The holy fool is willing to risk ridicule to follow the path of truth. He possesses an integrity displayed in the courage to be himself. He is not defined by the responses of others. He is free of judgment. The holy fool is unstoppable and therefore threatening to the authorities. He reminds us that each person is worthy of love. To be a fool for Christ means to reject worldly possessions in favor of the Spirit. St. Paul claimed that God has made foolish the wisdom of this world. If any man among you seems to be wise, let him become a fool that he may be wise. The fool is the precursor to the Savior. He is the one who jumps off the cliff of comfort into the unknown. He faces the dragon that others avoid. He dies a psychological death and is reborn. And finally, he returns to the world to share the gift he has found. Whether that gift is wisdom or love or simply the experience of surviving, the fool is a wanderer, energetic and immortal. He is always in a process of becoming. He reminds us that we are not fixed. We are not machines designed for efficiency. We are living beings designed for discovery. And to discover anything new, you must be willing to look like a fool. You must be willing to ask the dumb question. You must be willing to take the path that makes no sense to others. You must be willing to fall so that you can learn how to stand. So do not fear the fool within you. Invite him to your table. Listen to his jokes and his warnings. Let him puncture your seriousness and your pride. For in his empty head lies the oxygen that feeds the fire of your life. And in his laughter lies the only truth that can set you free. He is the beginning and the end. He is the zero that contains the infinite. He is you.